everyone, and welcome to Amplifying Authenticity. Today's guest is Jennifer Shlomovich, a plant-powered lifestyle educator, confidence coach, and the founder of The Confident Vegan. Jennifer's work sits at the intersection of authenticity, values-based living, and personal courage. Her journey includes breaking free from people-pleasing, navigating profound loss, and learning how to live in alignment with who she truly is. She's also the creator of what she calls the one-day trap, the belief that meaningful change can always wait until later, and the realization that later is not guaranteed. I can't wait to dive more into that. In this conversation, we explore what it takes to step out of people-pleasing, advocate for your needs, and live confidently in alignment with your values, even when those values might set you apart from others around you. Jennifer, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Amplifying Authenticity.
Megan, thank you for inviting me on your podcast. I'm so happy that we connected a few weeks ago and just really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And for those of you who might not know, Jennifer and I actually just had a conversation a few days ago, and it was a phenomenal conversation. So we're going to make sure we talk about your podcast as well, Jennifer, to be able to share. But I want to start with something that really intrigued me about your story. And I honestly don't know much about it yet. So I'm very curious about something that you name so clearly, and you call it the one-day trap. Can you explain what that is and how you see it showing up in people's lives?
Absolutely. So I'm going to share a brief story of a very traumatic event that happened in my life. It was May 4th, 2007. I was in the grocery store with my son, who was a little over a year old at the time, and my now ex-husband, which is another story, but in the grocery store. And one of my sisters called and I'm like, "Oh, we're busy. I'll just call her back later." And then it instantly there was a phone call again, and that's when I knew, okay, she's not leaving a message. She keeps calling. There's something going on. So my mother apparently had a heart attack in a parking lot, and she was unconscious for a few days, and then she passed away. And that in itself is very sad and a lot to navigate. But what hit me after all of that happened was how many years my mom would always write these lists, or she would send me letters. Like when I went away to college, email was out, like newly out-ish. But she would send me snail mail, and I kept a lot of those letters and lists of, next year I'm going to accomplish this, this, this. And it would be goals around her health, focusing on her health and losing weight and things she wanted to do around the house and places she wanted to travel, like all these things. And it kept getting moved one day this, one day that, one year this, and one day never came for her. And that really made me look inward in my own life. I was in an emotionally abusive marriage that I was afraid to fully acknowledge what was going on there. And I finally had to get real with things in my life and what I wanted for my son. And I took a leap. And, after a couple of years after my mom died, it took me some time to kind of process and figure things out. And I finally took that leap and went to a therapist. And my ex-husband did not like who I became after I started seeing a therapist. And and has said some very, unkind things about who I became when I started setting boundaries with him. And that propelled me into eventually filing for divorce. And that was a very crazy, tumultuous situation. And then I met my husband now. Eventually, there was a new life on the other side of these very scary, hard, traumatic decisions I had to make, because leaving being in the situation was traumatic and leaving the situation was traumatic. But on the other side, I was able to rebuild my life. I met my now husband. We've been together for 15 years. We just celebrated our 11-year wedding anniversary. We have a blended family. I've got a coaching certification. Like I did all these things. And the one day trap is part of that work that I do, and sharing with other women that, when I share my mom's story, I share that my mom was what I call the one day trap. And hopefully, that moved me into action. And I hope that her story can help other women listening also take big, important action in their life.
No. So, and thank you so much for sharing that. There were so many components there that I resonated with, and I'm sure our listeners can resonate with as well. One thing that I heard very clearly was how often we write lists or we make goals and we say, well, I'll start that tomorrow, or I'll do that next month, or I'll do that next week, or whatever it might be. And not
Hmm.
knowing for sure if we're going to have that opportunity. And the story of your mom is so sad that she wasn't able to do that. And it's a lesson for all of us that we never know when our last day here on this earth will be. And so pointed. Thank you so much. Um,
Yeah.
there's so there's something so I don't know if it's sombering, if it's reflective, but just in that idea that tomorrow is not promised. We've all heard that, but I
Hmm.
think bringing it into light and having a true example of that. Absolutely. One thing that you've been very open about is your people pleasing, and that I think you call yourself the recovering people pleaser.
Yes. So, and what I mean by that is like, even though I am not a people pleaser like I once was, and I've certainly evolved. It was 16 years ago, almost it was like January 2010 when I first walked into that therapist's office.
Mhm.
And a few months later, that was like that catalyst. It was like this cloud lifted, and I started becoming less of a people pleaser. And it's an always ongoing evolvement, right? I'm always refining
Mhm.
that. I'm very passionate about confidently being yourself
Yeah.
and advocating for your needs. And it can be very hard, especially as women, because we're the caregivers. We feel guilty if we take time for ourselves or we let other people down. And it's just so important that we do these things. And what were you asking me before? Because I was starting to answer
No.
you.
Yeah, no, it's just the idea of, I mean, the title
Oh,
recovering people pleaser, right? I think it's
yeah.
something that so many people can relate to. I think especially as women, we're taught that by society, by our families, by whoever might be around us, but we're taught
Mhm.
that our role is to take care of everyone else around us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at least for myself, that's what I was taught, right? I'm very maternal, and sometimes it can go to an extreme and become people pleasing.
Yeah. And what I discovered is that is at the root of what made me so stressed, anxious, and unhappy, because I was saying yes when I really wanted to say no deep down. I was hanging on to toxic friendships that weren't, even after I moved past the first marriage, it took me time to let go of certain friendships because you connect with people as this older version of yourself, and then you're no longer
Right.
this version, and then you feel bad, and it's like, what do I do with that? And
Right.
so it's an ongoing. So that's what I mean by a recovering people pleaser, because I feel like I'm always recovering from it in some capacity.
And that's the whole point of the word recovering, right? Is you're never completely healed or completely over it, right? It's recovering. It's never recovered. It's never past tense. It's something that we constantly look at. And, on this podcast, we talk a lot about the idea of authenticity. And I'm wondering if your people pleasing disconnected you from your own authenticity and what that felt like or what you noticed around that.
Yes, 100%. And I think this is why we connect so well, because we have a different way of saying the same things. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of connection here, and when we're on very similar missions. And yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just like blinked out what I was about to say. This never
No, you're
happens.
good. No, you're good. It's all good. I just really want to appreciate some of the work that you've done around understanding and putting yourself first, right? And when you talk about going to therapy, when you talk about counseling, and when you talk about setting those boundaries, those are all things that we need to do for ourselves. And oftentimes we're taught that we don't deserve those things. Were you ever given that
Yeah.
message? Or if you were given that message, how did you overcome that to be able to put yourself first?
Great question, Megan. And yeah, I think my parents meant well. But I had a very challenging childhood, and um that I think, unintentionally was taught for me to,
Mhm,
sacrifice for everyone else's needs. And there was also this, belief that I had as a young adult in my teens, a young adult, is I need to be who other people want me to be in order to be loved and accepted. And what happens is, now I remember what I was going to say before in reference to your question before is I didn't know who I was because I took
mm,
on the identities of everyone else, right? I was told, what religion to believe in and this and all the other little family habits around things, right? And then I'm set out into the world and I was trying to get away from one situation and only just got myself into, a not so great situation with my first marriage. Um and when I finally looked at things in a real way, I needed to disconnect from the things that weren't me. And I think that's the first thing that's easy is it's easy to tell when something's not for you, when it's not in alignment, because it doesn't feel good, right? It feels
mhm,
just icky. We feel weighted down, right? I know remember we talked about in my podcast, like shoulding, right? When you and I were having a
mhm,
conversation on my podcast, when we have to put the word should in it.
mhm,
So, one of the biggest challenges that I had on my journey was I disconnected from the things that weren't me. But then I didn't know who I was. Like, who was I
yeah,
outside of these things?
yeah.
And that can be a
Who
very
are we outside
ungrounding
of the
thing.
titles, right?
Right. Exactly.
We can't connect to who we truly are if we don't first disconnect from who we truly aren't,
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
right? And
100%.
it's the titles, and I can relate to that. I'm Reese's mom. I'm Rick and Donna's daughter, right? I'm the superintendent, I'm the owner, I'm the all the titles. But how about I'm just Megan? Yeah. What was the first part of yourself that you were able to reconnect with?
Yeah. So, what really helped me really connect with myself was even though after I got remarried and I had a somewhat of a sense of myself, I felt still unsatisfied with my career and other things, and came into coaching, part of the work that I was doing at the time, where I was speaking at different colleges about careers and TV, and uh, which is my other career stuff experience. And through all of that, I realized I love helping people. And so I did a 10-month coaching program, got my coaching certification. And that really cracked me open in like a whole different way because I had to go through the coaching experience in order to do the coaching. And
Mhm,
that made me realize in a lot of other ways how I still wasn't living in alignment to the life that I wanted, but I wasn't sure what that was. And then I created my coaching business. I knew I wanted to help people, especially women. Confidence and people pleasing were a big theme of that, but I didn't know specifically how that was going to be. And so after going through getting my coaching certification and then forming my LLC and creating my business, I realized I still didn't know who I was. And being a business owner will certainly teach you a lot of things about yourself you did not know.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And speaking to that idea of confidence, you are known as the confident vegan, and that is your company, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And this is actually a great story of how I leveled up in my, in my people pleasing, being a recovering people pleaser and being more confident. Is in 2014, I took a break from dairy. I have skin issues with rosacea and eczema, and I was reading how like diet can help with help with those symptoms. So I decided to do an experiment, and I gave up dairy for 30 days. And I felt better in ways that I didn't even realize I was feeling bad. And like you're so used to feeling a certain way, and then when you remove that thing, I felt lighter and better. And I was looking up all these dairy-free recipes, and a lot of vegan recipes came up. And I was like, wow, a lot of this food looks more exciting than the food that I make. All this creative use of the spices and seasonings and vegetables. And I found Forks Over Knives, which is a company that promotes whole food, plant-based eating. And being with, heart disease in my family and, looking back at my mom's situation, I wanted to be proactive in maintaining my health because I didn't want to come down with the same issues as I got older. And so I went on this like whole journey, and it started off for health reasons. And then it went into the ethical reasons that I really just started watching documentaries, and I'm like, wow, I really want to do this, but my husband's not going to want to do this. Our kids, who were much younger at the time, they're all in their early 20s now. Um, but they were much younger then. And I knew no one would want to do this. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do in social situations? People are going to judge me. What are they going to say? And then I had that aha moment of, oh, that's that little people pleaser part of me that was showing up in a different way. And when it
Right.
comes to confidence and setting boundaries, it's like building a muscle. And that's what I tell my clients all the time, right? You have to start, and you constantly build on it. And so I focused on what was easy for me to do first. So I would get cookbooks. I'm a cookbook junkie. I love looking at cookbooks, especially ones with great pictures. So I get cookbooks, and I would try recipes, and I started reducing the amount of animal products I was consuming. And then like if it was like the weekend when we had our kids all together, or if I was going to someone's house, then I would have the animal products. And then eventually I we were invited for Thanksgiving at a friend's house. And at this point, I was already in the coaching program. And I think this is what really helped me stand more firm and more grounded in my values. Is I
Mhm.
decided 2 weeks before we're going to a friend's house for Thanksgiving that I would try being vegan, again, doing it as an experiment. So I made a lentil loaf, and I made these really good cookies, these like fudge cookies that have black beans in them. So it was like healthy food, but tasty food. And I decided to see what would happen to me in this big social gathering. And I went, and people asked questions. They tried my food. I made enough to share. They were curious. And a lot of people were actually impressed. I did get a couple of annoying comments, but what I learned in that situation, Megan, was that I survived. I survived being different.
Absolutely. And isn't it so amazing that we can survive being different because society tells us that it's so bad, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
oftentimes it is bad. We are, for lots of different reasons, whether it's our gender, our sexuality, our religion, our meal choices, whatever it might be, people are going to have their judgments. People are going to have their opinions. And I'm so proud of you for stepping into that because I'm sure that was scary.
Yeah, it was. And I and it's changed a bit. And I lasted being vegan for like 2 months from that point. And then a
Mhm.
doctor told me to incorporate fish, which I did, but then I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I figured out the health stuff. It takes a little trial and error. Everyone's got different nutrition needs. But once I figured out how to do that for myself, I've been a committed vegan since April 29th, 2017. Like I remember the date. And I share so I created the Confident Vegan because I know what it's like to be the only vegan in your family. And I share my story as a way of how you can have those complicated conversations with your family member. My husband, in the beginning, I was the cook of the family. And so I still made non vegan food. But then when we became empty nesters, like 2.5 years ago, I was, it was time to change that. Like we can always change our minds, or we can always, refine. If some it didn't feel good to me anymore to make animal products. And since it was just us, I had that conversation again with my husband, and I said, I I'll if I'm the one going grocery shopping, I'll still pick it up, but I'm not going to prepare it anymore. If you want it, you can have it. And the majority of the time, our house is like almost vegan, just because I mean, there's still some animal products because my husband will make stuff, but we're mostly vegan because people would rather just eat if I'm cooking instead of having to do the cooking themselves.
Right.
So I found a way to make
Absolutely.
it work.
I love that. And one message that's really resonating with me as you share all of your different stories is that you've really experienced a lot of loss, whether it's loss of your mother, loss of your first marriage, loss of so many things. It's really a powerful force within your story. What I love, though, is that you viewed all of that loss as a catalyst and not an ending. Like everything that has happened in your life made way for something else to come in. And I'm wondering if that is something that you have purposely done or if it's something that happened along the way. Was it action based on your part? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's a great question. I think I had my parents both had very interesting lives before I came around. They were 43 when they had me, so they had previous marriages and previous kids. And I took a lot of interesting things from them. And I think one way my dad inspired me was he was born in England and he was growing up during World War II. And he moved around a lot, and he didn't finish school. He didn't finish high school. And then him and his family immigrated to Canada when he was 17. And then he just always did a lot of different careers, different things. He did real estate. He had a hypnotist show at one point. Like he ran businesses, drove taxi. Like my dad did a whole bunch of things. And then before my parents met, he got his GED and in like electronic engineering. And or then he went to college. He got his GED and then he got his degree. And then he got hired by a vocational school, and he taught high schoolers, about electronics and all of that. And then he went on to teaching night school and creating curriculums and teaching at a college, all of this later on in life. And then he retired as a teacher. And you wouldn't think he had all these other things happen in his life, but till all these things happen. And I think, it's never too late. And I wasn't even thinking about my dad's story or sharing it, but I can see how like it kind of ties in and connects with all of this, right? It's never too late to make a different decision, right? And, my dad was, in his early 40s when he created this whole other career for himself. And so from my dad, I think I learned that you can always build your life. You can always change. You can always, take a different trajectory. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think about that, but I'm glad you asked me that because now I see a way that my dad's story fits in with this.
So powerful. And I love the statement of it's never too late to make a different choice. And I think we hear that here and there at different times in our lives, but it resonated very differently today when you shared that. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking me that.
Yeah. Jennifer, I would love to know. We always ask all of our guests, what is your deeper why? Like, why do you do what you do? Can you share with our listeners what your why is?
Yeah. I'm on a mission to help inspire other women to live better lives. and to not put on hold the things that are most important to them. That is so sacred to me, not only because of what happened to my mom, but I know how my life changed and how my son's life changed when I made different choices and I didn't wait for the stars to align. Like the stars are never, there's never going to be the perfect moment, right?
Right.
And it can be hard to, like, sometimes we think we have to make a really big giant action to make a big thing happen. It can just be the smallest, simplest action. For me, it started with journaling and going to a therapist, right? And then it led to one thing, to the other thing, to the other thing, to the other thing. And here I am 16 years later. And, being on your podcast, sharing about things I had no idea were going to happen.
Right.
So I always try to let others know that you can just start small, start where you are, right? There's always something simple. If you want to change your career, the first easy step to do is, well, update your resume, right? Look at the thing, look if what do you want to do in this new career? What experience do you already have? What transferable skills do you have? Right? There's always these like little steps, and then we can figure it out from there. One of my favorite analogies, and I'm not even sure where I heard this, it was on some podcast, but it's like you're in a car on the road and it's dark, right? And you can only see what's ahead of you with what the car is lighting up ahead of you as you move along. And as you continue to move down the road, more of the way gets lit up. And so that's the same thing with our actions. We just have to start somewhere and continue to build on that. And then you're going to look back and realize, oh, wow, all these little steps all these little actions I took led to this really big monumental change in my life.
Yeah. I love the analogy using a car. There's so many analogies with cars, right? My father actually told me an analogy with a car when I was going through a divorce. And basically, I had just found out some pretty horrible information. And I was like, what do I do? Do I keep trying to push through this or do I just give up? What do I do? And my dad said to me, and my dad and I, up to that point, it wasn't the closest relationship. He was a little rough around the edges. Great man, but just a little bit more aggressive and rough around the edges. Now we're super close, but I remember he turned to me and he said, Megan, right now, you are broke down on the side of the road. In a car, you're broke down. Are you going to wait for AAA to come save you? They might take 6 hours. They might take 6 years. Are you going to get out of the car and walk? Or are you just going to figure it out and make it work? And it was like, well, I can't fix the car myself. He's like, but you could hitch a ride with someone else. You can figure it out. Are you just going to sit in the car and wait for someone to come save you? Or are you going to get out of the car and go somewhere? And it was like, okay, I can't just wait for someone to save me. Right. And we have to be able to say at some point, no matter how uncomfortable it might be, no matter how difficult it might be, that we have to take action to be able to get closer to who we want to be in the future, right? In order to amplify our own authenticity, we have to be willing to take action. We can't wait for someone else to do it for us. Yeah.
Yeah,
It just
I
reminded me of
love all
that.
of that. Yeah, I love all of that. And Dad, that's a really important point, right?
Yeah.
That we have to be the ones to save ourselves.
Mhm.
And 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 there's always a way to figure it out. And sometimes, like for me, when I have to figure it, sometimes it's just that first action. Maybe there's a friend you can call, right? And then that's
Mhm.
the next step of figuring it all out, right? We don't have figuring it all out could just be whatever that next important thing is. And then
Yeah.
you just build on that. And yeah, I really
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, you've told us so many great stories today, and I just really appreciate you sharing pieces of yourself. We like to ask a few silly questions if we could. Um, I'm going to ask, I always try to ask different ones. I'm going to ask this one. Do you prefer when you're in your most creative space Do you prefer journaling in the backyard or do you prefer writing in a coffee shop or being surrounded by noise?
Love coffee shops.
Oh,
And it's so interesting. I was reflecting on this. I'm the most creative in a coffee shop. And I had this insight actually a couple weeks ago. It's very interesting you're asking me this. And I think there's a subconscious feeling of safety because when I was in the middle of going through my divorce, I couldn't leave the household for about 8 months until we had an agreement in place. And so coffee shops became a place of safety for me. And so I realized that there's this like I feel at home at a coffee shop. There's something secure about that. And I find myself being the most creative in those places.
love that. Do you have a favorite drink in your coffee shop?
I get usually either a soy milk matcha or an oat milk matcha. And there's a few coffee shops by me, two specifically, that have amazing vegan treats. So I'll get myself a matcha, I'll get myself a vegan pastry, and I'll usually put on my earbuds and I'll just zone out. But there's just something really comforting to my soul when I'm in that atmosphere.
Love that. Jennifer, thank you so much for this conversation. Your honesty, your courage, and your reminder that alignment does not require perfection, just intention. None of us are perfect. And I love that you don't claim to be and you encourage others to embrace their imperfectness. We actually just started a new kind of campaign that we're all perfectly imperfect. And for those listening, you can learn more about Jennifer's work at theconfidentvegan.com. We'll also put some links in our show notes. We want you to connect with her on Instagram, LinkedIn, join her email list for tools, reflections, and a free resource. Do you want to share a little bit about the resource that you're going to be sharing with our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I have a heart healthy recipe book. There's sheep pan pancakes, banana walnut oat muffins, and a chocolate chip pumpkin loaf that I always make. That's always a big hit.
Oh my
So,
gosh, chocolate chip pumpkin.
yes, and it's so easy. These recipes are oil free, they're heart healthy, and I love sharing comfort food that's also good for us.
Yeah,
So, so
I
that's
love that.
yeah, so that's one of the free resources. And if I can also just quickly mention, I also have a morning show that I do with a friend. And it's called That Vegan Morning Show. We're live every Monday at 7 a.m. Eastern. And by the time this comes out, it'll be past, but we're doing tofu classes. So we're doing our first tofu class this month. And then we're going to be alternating with a tofu alternatives class as well. People are allergic to soy. So, and all those things again are on my website.
I feel like I could go down that spiral with you right now because I have tried tofu in so many different ways and I've just never been able to enjoy it. And I bet from hearing you speak and hearing some of the recipes, I wonder if you made me tofu, if I might be able to say, I like this.
Yeah,
Next
tofu.
time I'm in your area, we're going to have to do like a tofu party. I'll try it.
Absolutely. Anytime you
All
want to have
right.
a tofu party with me, Megan, I would love to do that.
All right, let's make it happen. And we talked about this a little bit, but you also host your own podcast. You have the Monday morning show, you have your podcast. One final question. If there's one soundbite, one phrase, one statement that you would love everyone to remember after listening to today's show, do you have one that you would like to leave with our listeners?
It's a very good question. There's so many. It's so important to confidently be yourself
Love that.
and embrace that. And what I have learned that when you're not confidently who you are, it leads to so much more pain, so much more suffering. And sometimes it's hard to acknowledge what our truth is because our truth may not be for convenient for the people around us, whatever that truth might be. And so it's always important to create that sacred space to honor who you are and to make sure that you do the things you need to do. And it's not easy, but that's when you find the support, whatever that might be, to help you.
What I really appreciate about that is the idea that my truth does not have to be convenient for you.
Yes. For s-
And that I just want to snap my fingers and do some yes, yes. Like I just that's powerful right there. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that. And that is something that I hope will resonate with our listeners as much as it just landed with me. I want to thank you again. Thank you to everyone listening. If this episode gave you permission to stop waiting, to speak up for yourself, or to take one small aligned step, I hope you carry that forward. I'm Megan Fucciarelli, the amplifier of authenticity. And until next time, keep choosing alignment over approval and amplifying authenticity in your everyday life. Thank you so much.